One of the many reasons I love the archives is just the opportunity that it provides for customization. Really, more so than any other space in the museum, the archives is nimble and can really respond on the fly to the interests of its audience. And one way to really see this clearly is by taking a closer look at the educational experiences of student groups that come to the archives. Over the past decade, I've worked with a variety of teachers to create personalized experiences for thousands of students in the archives. And in tangible ways, we archivists serve honestly as matchmakers, marrying our knowledge of the collections with the interests, goals, and passions of the students before us. And I'm really excited to lift a veil on this process. So when I'm working with a teacher who has never brought their students to the archives before, I start by describing the space as a hands-on history lab that can shapeshift to accommodate the passions and interests of their students. What follows usually then is just a common back and forth dialogue between myself and the educator. It starts with the educator sharing the topics that they're covering in the classroom, while my mind whirs in the background with all of the great potential collections to share with this group of students. I often can't contain myself from sharing insights into these particular stories and how I imagine them to be a good fit for this group. And this helps give the educator a taste of some of the possible storylines that their students can explore. I'd be a fool, though, if I solely relied on my collections knowledge to devise a customized research experience for students. We have been collecting Western Pennsylvania history for well over 100 years, and our holdings regularly surprise me as well as the rest of my colleagues. That's why I dedicate a good bit of time to also searching our online catalog and our other content management tools to surface relevant storylines in our collections. And different search terms yield different results. And if you ever want to hear an archivist just really wax poetic about the excitement that comes with creatively plugging in different search terms, just open with that question and be ready to listen for a good long while. I also, throughout this process, frequently chat with my colleagues to get their expert insights as well. So once I have a preliminary list of these collections, I compile short descriptions of the people who created the relevant collections and then send them to the teacher to review. And if the teacher has the availability and the time, I encourage them to come to the archives and to scout the collections before the kiddos come through the door. I found again and again just the simple fact they know their students the best, and they can use the lens of their knowledge of their students to identify what particular storylines and what particular sources are going to best resonate with their kiddos. But before this phase of the work is complete, the teacher and I dig into defining what other goals we'd like to set for the visit. I feel deeply that this needs to be more than just a show and tell experience, or else the students may not have the opportunity to fully encounter the opportunities of empowerment that exist with encountering the rawness of primary source material. It really gives them an opportunity to dig into these raw sources and to build their own arguments about what has happened in history. But rather than continuing to speak in generalities, I want to share one of the most exciting opportunities I've had working with a group of students in the archives. This happened earlier this year, but if I'm honest, the seeds of this visit were planted many years before and really only started to sprout last fall. At an educator outreach event, I got to chatting with a teacher from Riverside High School in Beaver County. She mentioned that she oversaw a new student group at her high school, and they were called the Future Special Educators Club. My interest piqued immediately. She was interested in learning more about how to connect her students to the history of special education in new ways. The teacher confirmed that the students knew the dates and names of the bedrock legal decisions and laws that shaped special education locally and throughout the country. But she was really seeking avenues to bring this history to life for a group of students whose real life experiences revolved around what special education looked like today, and the vision of fuller inclusion of disabled students within typical classrooms. I couldn't believe my ears. I knew that we could build a really unique experience for these students. And that was thanks to a decades-long collaboration with the Western Pennsylvania Disability History and Action Consortium. And what was more, I knew that we had done the work with the consortium to build relationships with a handful of families whose lives were inextricably shaped by the education and support that were or were not offered to their children based solely on when these students from the past were born. Needless to say, I was elated and honored by this opportunity to share these stories with this group of students. Now, I just had to dig in and build out this session in the archives. And given that this was a small group of 10 students, I chose the archival collections of 4 former students whose experiences in special education, or a lack thereof, throughout the 20th century was reflected in their collections. And the names of these students from left to right is Jolene Elder. Jolene is depicted as a young girl, and this is one of her first school pictures. We have Leah Tetcha underneath Jolene, and this is a photograph of she and her mother at Soldiers and Sailors on her graduation day from Langley High School. We have Siobhan Hensel, again, one of the earliest school portraits of Siobhan. We have Daniel Flavin, who is at a party at Polk State Center and is wearing a cowboy hat and a shirt that reflects his love for cowboys and horses. And we have Melinda Feather in the upper right corner, and this is taken from a family portrait with her mom and her dad. So looking at each of these collections, I had to select a sandbox of source material that each group could explore. I made sure to prioritize sources that were created directly by the students themselves. And because of the generosity of these former students and their families, the archives could offer collections generated by these disabled students themselves, not just by the policymakers, the families, and the advocates who surrounded and supported them. There is an oft-repeated adage within the disability community: nothing about us without us. We could honor that principle with these collections. You might ask, what does a personal archive of special education look like? Honestly, it's not too dissimilar from those tubs of schoolwork that perhaps many of your parents kept for you. These collections include pieces of original artwork, curriculum materials, lesson plans, awards, and materials created in partnership with aides. Preliminary assessments, as well as diplomas and graduation photos, bookend these collections. Now, this is all important in and of itself, yet we must also prioritize the learning objectives of the educator. How do we dwell with these collection items and emerge with insights into special education history? Let's spend some time with a few of the stories to find out. Melinda Feather, who I'm honored to say has joined us here in person today, was born on August 5th, 1963. During the first 2 years of her life, Melinda spent extended times hospitalized. Melinda experienced a number of medical issues that confounded doctors at the time. And in an era with very few early intervention services for disabled children, Melinda's mother, Catherine, assumed the role of fierce advocate for Melinda. Melinda's parents resisted recommendations from medical professionals at the time to institutionalize her, which was, of course, common practice at the time. Melinda's mother, Catherine, and father, Reed, were both devout Christians, which informed their decision to resist institutionalization. In 1970, Melinda and her family relocated from Cincinnati to Moon Township. Thanks to the advocacy of her mother, Melinda was enrolled at Western Hills School, a special education center shared by multiple school districts. And it's important to note that this was a segregated, separate school for disabled children. And unfortunately, Melinda experienced bullying at Western Hills, and Catherine was unhappy with the quality of her education on top of that Melinda was receiving at this school. So as a result of Catherine's persistent advocacy, Melinda successfully transferred to the Children's Institute of Pittsburgh, where she completed her education in 1984. Catherine's support of her daughter launched a multi-decade career in disability advocacy for Catherine. And in the words of Melinda, my mom fought for me. The reality is that Melinda was enrolling at Western Hills in a bleak, broader educational landscape for disabled students. As late as 1970, 80% of American children with disabilities were not being educated in public schools. And this is recent history. Over 1/3 of the people still alive in the United States today were born into a country where a free and appropriate public education was regularly denied to disabled students. This still boggles my mind. What changed? A groundbreaking 1971 lawsuit was filed by a Pennsylvania-based parent-led disability rights organization that established every child's right to a free and appropriate public education. The court sided in the parents' favor and dictated that for the first time in Pennsylvania history, all public schools in the state must accommodate disabled students. They gave the schools a short leash too, stipulating that no disabled student could be denied a public education by the start of the 1972 school year. This Pennsylvania case was integral to influencing US Congress to pass the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, more commonly known as IDEA, in 1975, which enshrined in federal law every disabled child's right to an education. Now, born just a few years before Melinda, West End native Vonnie Hensel attended a school that literally came into existence as a result of the Right to Education consent decree. Prior to that, Vonnie's parents also resisted medical recommendations to institutionalize her. Denied admission to her local public school, Vonnie's parents turned to private schools to seek out an education for their daughter prior to 1972. And with the Right to Education consent decree, Vonnie enrolled at the newly created Conroy Education Center and was a member of its first graduating class in 1983. So on this slide is depicted a piece of Vonnie's artwork, a weekly schedule for Vonnie, as well as her graduation certificate from Conroy. Now, as Melinda was completing her education at the Children's Institute and eventually transitioning to her first job, Leah Detre was born in Polish Hill in 1984. From the time that Leah entered an integrated preschool, her mother, Stephanie, was an ardent inclusive education advocate. Upon entering Pittsburgh Public Schools, Leah was placed in a segregated kindergarten class at Greenfield Elementary. Only Leah's art and music classes were integrated at Greenfield. Due to Stephanie's advocacy, though, Leah was included in a general education classroom at Fort Pitt Elementary by the first grade. As a result of their advocacy, Leah became the first student to be included in a typical classroom at PPS with an intellectual and developmental disability. At this time, this was referred to as mainstreaming. Leah graduated from Langley High School in 2004. She greatly enjoyed her high school career, where she swam competitively and was a member of the cheerleading squad. During her time at PPS, Leah also participated in City Connections, which was an innovative transitional readiness program to equip disabled students with the skills to aid them in life after school. This type of program just simply would have been unimaginable around the time when Melinda and Siobhan were born. And after completing school, Leah worked for Mulaney's Harp and Fiddle here in the Strip District. So during the student session, we worked through a series of prompts to draw the high schoolers out and spur them to consider their person within a broader context. And more literally, we helped the students situate these folks' stories within a larger time frame related to the Right to Education consent decree and the IDEA in 1975. And just as we just did, the high schoolers, of course, also spent time just getting to know each of these 5 individual folks. And here are some of their reflections that jumped out to them. And to me, I really love some of the reflections that were submitted connected to Leah Detre. They really made note of her inclusion and the level of participation and recreational activities that she got to embrace. Students also really made note of the individual parent, in particular mother's advocacy relative to these students as well. We're also working in the archives to find ways to assess what does student learning look like in the archives and how can we quantify it. So this is just one of the first attempts that I've taken into getting a sense from the students of how this approach to learning is or is not resonating with them and how it may or may not inform their understanding of a topic or a subject matter moving forward. A primary goal of this session and really every student learning experience in the archives is to bring the study of history to life through individual human experiences that can be found in the archives. If framed thoughtfully, this is really a tremendous opportunity in the archives to stoke historical empathy and to spark new scholarly insights into the past. That's another thing I love about the archives. Their rawness gives students the agency to draw their own conclusions about what this person's experience can tell us about the past. And in the case of these 5 collections, this group had the opportunity to see the real life impact of these landmark pieces of legislation and legal decisions and how they had the impact on the lives of real people and in fact, real Western Pennsylvania students just like them. This was particularly effective, I believe, for a group of future teachers, many of whom are already interested and invested in the field because of the hands-on opportunities it provides to have an impact on individuals' lives. And I truly believe too that if an archives is deep enough and inclusive enough of a region's story, it can really embody empathy and insight. And I think we've started to do this with our preservation of local disability history and of many other topics related to other communities as well. Thanks to the generosity of this community and others who have entrusted their stories with us. Thank you.